Now, once the immunological response starts, how long does that take to stop it? Because we know we can flush the gut, we can get gluten out of us fast, but it's already sparked an immune response. So how long does that immune response last? And because it's the immune response for most people that causes the symptoms. So there have been a number of studies on how long the antibodies last when you're exposed to gluten. And so I've published a couple of them up here for you. This one published in the Scandinavian Journal of Clinical Lab Investigation. You see here, decreased by 50% of plasma IgA tissue transglutaminase antibody concentrations within 2 months after start of a gluten-free diet in children with celiac disease used as confirming diagnostic test. So what does that mean? That means after 2 months of being gluten-free, 50% of the antibody production that was in that child's body was gone. That means the other 50% was still present, right? So what do we call that? In science, we call that a half-life, right? Half-life is the time it takes for something to clear your body in the blood, from the bloodstream out of the body, right? And so the half-life of antibodies, of gluten-based antibodies, of IgA antibodies is 2 months. Okay, that means the damage from those antibodies that are circulating in you, it's happening for 2 months. So when you hear me say that one breadcrumb can cause inflammation for up to 2 months, this is where this is coming from. That's where this statement is really coming from. It's because the half-life of those gluten antibodies can last up to 2 months. Now, remember, even after 2 months, there's still gluten antibodies circulating in you, the other half that haven't left yet. And so really, technically, it could take even longer, but symptomatically, a lot of people will find some tangible, noticeable, objective, and subjective improvements in how they feel in that 2 months of really strictly following a gluten-free diet in the right way. Now, if you're following a gluten-free diet, you know, eating corn, rice, and all that other nonsense, you're probably not going to see much of a change. But if you're doing it in the right way, generally within 2 months, there's some type of symptom reduction. Because these antibodies, remember what causes the damage. It's the antigen-antibody complex. It means it's the gluten combined to the antibody that creates the inflammatory damage. So we want those things out of us as quickly as possible because that's where the damage is coming from. This other study here, you can see serum antibodies have a half-life of 30 to 60 days, and this is referring predominantly to IgG and IgA antibodies. So we've got, in this case, 30 to 60 day half-life, in this case, a 60-day half-life. So we're talking about really kind of a 2-month half-life, right? So how long does it take for those antibodies to quit creating immune inflammation? We say 2 months, but really up to 4 months, because if the half-life is 2 months, we got to get the other half out of you, and that can take 4, and then we still have a half-life of that what was half, and so then we have another 2 months, which is 6. So this is why, again, you also sometimes hear me say, you've got to be gluten-free in the best and most perfect way for 6 months. If you're giving the diet a 2-week trial run, you're not going to see such a dramatic improvement because you're still going to have circulating immune antigen complexes that are creating an inflammatory response. So you're not really going to notice a tremendous improvement. Now, some people do, and that's not to say that you can't notice an improvement, but that's just to say to give the diet a fair chance if you don't know whether it's the right diet for you to follow and you're just trying to follow it for the sake of, you know, trials and tribulations. 6 months is really the minimum that you want to be gluten-free to make an assessment and a real true judgment as to whether or not the diet is helpful. Otherwise, you're probably wasting your time. And, you know, I wouldn't encourage any of you to waste your time because going gluten-free is a 12-week learning curve. Just to learn how to do it right for most people takes about 12 weeks because you're not just saying, I'm not going to eat grain anymore. You got to find recipes. You've got to find food ideas. You got to find food that you enjoy and that you like to eat. You've got to find how you can prepare those foods. You got to find the time to prepare those foods. You got to understand cross-contamination and understand where hidden gluten comes from. And that takes time, right? And so it's that time that you want to give yourself doing it as best as you can, doing it as right as you can, not making the mistakes. But again, 2 to 4 months is what we're talking about just to get the antibody clearance. So the antibodies are what are creating the damage, and so we're not going to get ahead if you're not going gluten-free for that long. So now let's talk about strategies. So let's say, okay, Dr. Osborne, I'm gluten-free, doing my best, but I got glutened over the weekend. It was accidental. What can I do because I feel horrible? So let's talk about top strategies to get the one we want. Remember, what I taught you tonight was two things. I said there's a transit time up to 52 hours of mouth to anus for that gluten to escape and get out of your body. Now, if you've been gluten and you know it, one of the best things that you can do is flush it out of your system faster than 52 hours. And so what I would suggest in that regard is flushing out your bowel. And one of the ways that you can do that very, very safely without worrying about major health problems is doing what's called a vitamin C flush, a Detox C flush. Is you're taking enough vitamin C, and the way this is done, very, very simply put, is if you're using Detox C to do this, you take 2 teaspoons, a level teaspoon, 2 level teaspoons mixed in 3 ounces of water, and you drink that every 15 minutes. Now, before you start a flush like this, it's ideal that you're not doing it with a full stomach of food. It's ideal that you try to give yourself a little bit of leeway between that meal where you got gluten and trying to do this flush, because otherwise you're just going to irritate your bowels. But so 6 to 8 hours away from that meal, preferably. So a flush is also best done where you can stay close to the bathroom, because you're going to be running to it frequently. And if you're at work, it's a bad idea. You don't want to try to do a flush on a day where you're working or in the office. So a flush should be done best in a semi-fasted state, 6 to 8 hours away from food. It should be done on a day where you can stay home and somewhere where you can stay close to the toilet. And you take 2 teaspoons of vitamin C powder every 15 minutes until you have a flush. What is a flush? It's diarrhea. You're cleaning your bowels out, right? So 2 teaspoons every 15 minutes mixed in 3 ounces of water. Okay, 2 teaspoons every 15 minutes mixed in 3 ounces of water until your bowels flush out. Once you start having diarrhea, basically, don't keep taking the vitamin C. Discontinue taking the vitamin C altogether. Now, what some people find is doing a flush irritates and causes burning in the rectum. One of the things you can do to prevent that is you can put a coconut oil lubricant, and it may sound a little bit graphic, but you can put a coconut oil lubricant around the rim of the anus to protect it, because you're flushing out gluten and all the yuck that comes with it, right? So you're trying to get that out of you while not creating an irritation. And so the flush can get it out of you very, very fast. It's just one strategy to get it out of you quickly so that it's just not stasis in your GI tract. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do as well after that flush is consider fasting. And if you fast long enough, and there are different strategies for fasting, you've probably heard me talk about fasting a lot as it relates to like intermittent fasting. But in this case, we're really talking more about between a 1 and a 3 day fast, because what you really want to get, if you can get into that 48 plus hour range of a fast, you're stimulating stem cell regeneration, and this is what is going to help fight inflammation. This is going to help create stem cells that are regenerative and help restore the damage. So anywhere between 1 and 3 days, water fast. Water, H2O, not broth, not other things, just water. You don't want your gut to have anything else, just water. Now, if you're diabetic or if you've got blood sugar problems, you really don't want to do this unsupervised. So make sure that you've got a good doc that's monitoring you and helping you, avoid a problem. And especially this is true if you're a type 1 diabetic and you rely on insulin. So it may not be the best thing for you to do there, especially if you're not doing it with medical supervision. But 1 to 3 day water fast can be very helpful at generating stem cells, which is what we're trying to generate in order to heal the damage that gluten has been causing, right? The other thing that we can do, after that fast or even during that fast is you can support the microbiome. One of the things that we know gluten does when you get exposure is it wrecks the microbiome, right? It damages certain types of bacteria, and those bacteria that become damaged or become imbalanced are helpful in repairing and restoring the actual GI tract itself from that gluten-induced damage. So a lot of times people that have been gluten, especially repetitively, have terrible microbiome function in and of itself. And so really strong, high-dose targeted probiotic can be very, very supportive in this regard. The one I recommend is you got to be careful with probiotics because a lot of them are corn-based. And you don't want that either for the reasons we talked about earlier, but there's something called ultrabiotic defense. And what this is a very high dose probiotic, very safe to take, but it's several hundred billion colony forming units of several of the primary species of bifido and lactobacillus that we know gluten can actually damage. We also know that some of these strains of species have actually been shown to reduce symptoms in people that have been gluten. There have been a number of studies that have shown this. So taking the microbiome support, which is again through probiotic, can be extremely helpful. And it's supporting digestion. One of the things you can do. So this is more not. You don't do this so much when you get gluten, although you can, because if you've got gluten in you and you want to break it down better, you can take something like Gluten Shield, which is a digestive enzyme that breaks gluten down. But this is also something that you can do proactively. If you are traveling and you have to eat out or something along that line, and you do your best to order from the menu, but you get gluten because somebody made a mistake. Having that Gluten Shield there can be the thing that helps to break that gluten down and minimize the damage that occurs as a result of that gluten exposure. So this is proactive. You can also do it when you get gluten exposure, but it's better used proactively as a tool, in my opinion. And then we have here, going down here, is just educate yourself, which is what you're doing tonight, right? We'll talk more about that. But part of knowing what to do is knowing what is happening when you make the mistake. And so again, understanding transit time and understanding the length of time that gluten can create damage is very important. Now, if you haven't done my master class, and it's free of charge, it doesn't cost you anything to do, you should go check it out. We can put that link up, glutenology.net/registration. And what it is it's a 14-hour class, right? So when you're ready to do this, and if you haven't done it, I highly encourage all of you, if you haven't done it, to do it, because it'll give you a fundamental breakdown of everything you ever thought you needed to know or wanted to know about gluten and how to be on a gluten-free diet in the right way so that you can be successful, because most people do it wrong. So take advantage of that. And then, one of the best ways to heal from a gluten exposure is sleep, right? We heal when we rest. Right? So don't underestimate the power of a few good nights sleep. I mean, when your body's sick, if you're really reeling or struggling from the inflammation of a gluten exposure, you might consider taking a sick day or two and letting your body heal and repair and recover, where you can do things like flush, fast, and microbiome up, right? And sleep so that you can recover and not pay a price for months to come. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.